Hey guys, it's Catherine Morgan here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Now this channel is here to bring you short but powerful videos to help you to navigate both the emotional side of money, our relationship with money, and the practical steps to help you to reduce financial anxiety and become more financially empowered to deserve wealth, grow wealth, and create wealth. My name's Catherine and I'm a qualified financial planner and international multi-award winning financial coach. That's a bit of a mouthful. So welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and do leave me a comment below and let me know what was your biggest takeaway from listening to this video. Speak to you soon. So let's get started then. Let's talk about the top 20 tips of how you can improve your credit rating. Now, the first thing just to mention is that there is not just one way of assessing your credit rating. There's actually 3 different credit scores that we have to be aware of. And some of you may have heard of some of these before. Some of these may be new to you. And if you are watching this and this is a subject you want to do a deep dive around, then grab a piece of paper and a pen because you'll want to make notes for this. So you have kind of 3 different credit scores. You've got one through Experian. Many of you have probably heard of Experian. One through Equifax and another one through TransUnion. These are kind of like the 3 main credit scoring agencies that we have in the UK. Now, each one of these agencies has its own stats. So the reason that's important to mention is, let's say, for example, you've downloaded the ClearScore app. As an example, ClearScore is one of the apps that you can download to have a look at what's on your credit file. Now, ClearScore is associated with Equifax. So if you're only using ClearScore, you're only really going to get like 33% of actually what's on your credit file. So there's a couple of other ones that I'd always suggest that you go and have a look at. The first one is Martin Lewis's Credit Club. These are all completely free, by the way. I use Martin Lewis's Credit Club myself. That's the kind of my go-to credit score. It's not an app, it's on his website. So if you just Google Martin Lewis Credit Club, it's completely free. You just put in your details and then you can have a look at your credit file. So don't be paying for these subscription-based services. Some people pay Experian directly for their credit file. You don't need to do that. You can just register with Martin Lewis's Credit Club, ClearScore, and there's another one called Credit Karma, and Credit Karma links in with TransUnion. So if you use all 3 of those, that will give you access to all 3 of those different credit scoring systems. So that's the first thing just to kind of cover. So if you haven't done that, go and have a look at your credit file, because there might be things on there that you're not aware of. There might be errors on your credit file. There might just be some generally interesting data. There might be accounts on there that you've forgotten that you had. And also a lot of these apps as well, once you subscribe to them, because you do have to use your email address, and they are free, but then they'll send you when email alerts, for example, when there's been a change on your credit score, which is really useful to prevent fraudulent applications. They'll also send you emails if your credit rating changes. So it's a really good way of kind of just keeping up to date with everything. So that's the first thing. Number 2 then is to make sure you get registered on the voters roll. This can have quite a big impact on your credit rating. If you're not already registered on the voters roll, then go and do that, because lenders will check the electoral rolls. They'll check for evidence of fraud by making sure that you live where you say that you do. So make sure that you do that. If you're not eligible to vote in the UK, you can send those 3 main credit agencies, so Experian, Equifax and TransUnion. You can send them certified copies of your proof of residency and you can ask them to put a note on your file. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is to make monthly payments on time, even if it's just the minimum payment. So if, for example, you've got a credit card, then make sure that you've got a direct debit set up so it's automated, so you don't even have to think about it. It's really simple to, it's quite easy to forget making a payment, even if it's just the minimum payment. So get it on a direct debit so you don't have to think about it. Even if you want to pay more than the minimum, if you've got the minimum covered, then at least you know you're not going to miss any payments. So making monthly payments on time will have a big impact on your credit rating because it shows consistency and it shows like reliability for credit ratings. So that's one thing to do. Some of these may be really obvious ones, but sometimes it's the most obvious ones that you kind of think, oh yeah, I'm not really doing that. So I'm kind of going right back to basics with this. Tip number 4 is pay your bills by direct debit. So make sure that you don't miss your payments. Get them paid on time because missed late payments can stay on your credit file for up to 6 years. So you want to make sure that you don't miss any payments, even if it's just by accident. So make sure you have everything paid by direct debit. Tip number 5 then is to check who you are financially linked with. Now, depending on your situation, you could still be financially linked to previous partners. You could have financial links based on your address or previous addresses. It's just one of those things to just check on your credit file. There's a section in there that says who you're financially linked with. Because when your relationship changes, for example, you need to make sure you split up with them financially as well as physically. And I know that sounds like a really obvious thing, but if you've got any accounts, utility bills, mobile phone bills, anything like that's in joint names, and you haven't separated that on separation, then you'll still be linked to their relationship, their habits with money if you've still got those links. So check who you're financially linked with, and if there are any inconsistencies or any inaccuracies, then you can contact the credit bureaus and ask them for that information to be changed and updated. So that was tip number 5. Tip number 6 is to stay within your available credit limit. Again, it's a really obvious one, but when you go over your credit limit, that can have quite a big negative impact on your credit score. So if your credit card's limit is £2,000, for example, then don't exceed that credit limit. And ideally, you should try and keep within around about between 30 and 50% of your credit limit. So let's say your credit limit is £2,000. Ideally, you don't really want to go any higher than about £1,000, like using £1,000 of that credit facility. Again, it just shows that you're not maxing out on that credit facility. So it's always a good opportunity as well to review old credit cards you're not using, overdrafts, that kind of thing, to tidy some of those up. And in some ways it can be beneficial to keep older accounts open because it shows the history. But if it's credit facilities that you're just not using, then it's going to come up under your kind of affordability. So it's always worth keeping that in mind as well. The next tip I've got for you then is to reduce the amount of debt that is owed over time. So that's a very obvious one, but if you have got overdrafts and credit cards and loans and mortgages, for example, then trying to reduce the amount of debt that you have obviously will have a big impact on your credit rating. So that's a really positive thing to do. Tip number 8 is to pay off your debt rather than transferring it to another provider. So I know a lot of people will balance transfer credit cards. So they'll maybe be on a credit card at 0% for 6 months. And then once that 6 months is finished, they'll look to move that to another 0% card. Now, if obviously you're not in a position to pay anything off that, then that's a good thing to do because it means you're paying less interest. But it also it doesn't show credit lenders your ability to make kind of more payments than you're required, maybe more than the minimum. So just moving them from one card to another doesn't really show much improvement on your credit rating. So, even if you're able to just put a little bit of extra money off every month, that does show your ability to make commitments to pay over and above just your minimum, rather than just kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul type arrangement. Obviously, in some situations, you have to do that. But paying off the debt rather than just moving it from one to the other will also have an improvement on your credit file. That was tip number 8. So tip number 9 is to check for any mistakes on your credit file. So this could be old accounts registered at old addresses. I had a situation probably about 5-6 years ago when I lived in the Channel Islands. I thought that my old Orange, do you remember Orange, mobile phone, my contract had finished, I paid everything off. And then I moved to Jersey in the Channel Islands for 5 years. And when I came back, I applied for something. I think it was like Sky or something like that. And they declined me. And I remember thinking, why they declined me? And it was because Orange had still kept this like final payment of like £32 or something. And because I didn't know about it, because they were sending correspondence to my UK address, which was being rented out to a tenant, and the tenant was just binning the letters, I didn't know about it. So it wasn't until I looked on my credit rating and I contacted Orange to say this shouldn't be on my file, get the case closed down, that they then removed it. So check for mistakes on your credit file. This includes all old accounts registered at old addresses. And as I say, if you do see any inconsistencies or any inaccuracies, then contact the companies to let them know. So that's tip number 9. Tip number 10 is to check for any fraudulent activity. So, someone who's committed fraud and is using your address, for example, that could impact on your credit score, even if it was nothing to do with you. And so one of the things that you can do is if you're wondering or you're fearful that maybe somebody has tried to open accounts in your name, then you can go to the CIFA's website, CIFAS website. I'll pop a link below for that. And you can speak to that company and you can just basically find out whether that is you or whether that's somebody that is pretending to be you. So always check for fraudulent activity. If you register with one of these apps like ClearScore, for example, they'll often email you when there's been a change on your credit rating, and that can flag something up like that. So that's tip number 10. Tip number 11 is to don't apply for lots of credit in a short space of time. Again, this can have a big impact on your credit rating. So if you're declined by somebody and then you're declined by somebody else, the challenge then is you'll just keep applying to different organizations, and that can have a really detrimental impact on your credit rating. So really try and space them out, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But don't sort of go for one, then another, then another, then another, then another. If you have been declined, try and find the reason why before you make a new application somewhere else. So tip number 12 is to close down any unused credits. So credit cards, store cards, debit cards, bank accounts, anything that you're not using, then close them down, because lenders will look at your available credit, your affordability. So they'll look at what your total lending capacity is. So let's say you've got a credit card with 2,000 available credit, another one with 2, another one with 2, an overdraft of 2. They'll add all those together, even if you're not using them, because you've been accepted and you've been given that available credit, then they won't give you any more, for example, if you've already got that available to you. So just close down anything that you're not using. Tip number 13 then is to build your credit history with a credit card. Now this is a really careful one to tread carefully on. If you have a history of overspending on credit cards, or you have an unhealthy relationship with money because maybe you have more of a tendency to use credit facilities, and I talk about this from a place of experience. When I lived in my 20s, I lived off credit cards and overdrafts. So when I got out of debt, I had to be really super strict with myself. So just be mindful of that. And if you think there's a possibility that by having a credit card you would get back into debt again, then don't do it. Don't do this course of action. But building your credit history with a credit card is a great place to start. So let's say you've got children and they want to build up their credit rating for their first mortgage, for example. Having a credit card and paying it in full at the end of every month is a really good way to evidence and show that you are a responsible borrower, that you can use that credit card with responsibility and pay it off. So even if it's a small amount of money, even if you just say, right, I'm going to put all my food shopping on my credit card, I would just pick one category, or set up a direct debit to pay the balance off in full at the end of each month. And there's some super fun credit cards out there as well that will give you like loyalty bonuses and air miles and reward points and things like that. So, but just tread a little bit carefully with that one, depending on your relationship with money. Tip number 14 then is to minimize applications. So one of the ways that you can do this is by using eligibility calculators, where you don't actually have to have a full credit rating done before you can actually make the application. So they call it like a soft print. It doesn't do a hard print on your credit file, it does a soft print. So if you go onto Martin Lewis's Credit Club, for example, let's say you're thinking of doing a balance transfer or thinking of applying for a new credit card, then it will tell you in advance what's the likelihood of you being approved for that particular credit card before you make the application. And you can use eligibility calculators just to give you an idea of what kind of credit facilities might be available to you before you make the application. It's one of the best tips I can give you. So you're kind of preempting what the decision might be, and they'll give you that data based on your credit ratings. So all of these apps I've been mentioning in this video will be really helpful for that. So minimize your applications. Tip number 15 is make sure that you your rent boost your credit score. So a lot of people message me saying, well, I don't have a mortgage, but I'm paying rent. How can I evidence that? So paying rent on time is a kind of the most straightforward way of doing that. And you can sign up to a free rental exchange scheme by paying rent through that scheme. It actually improves your credit rating. So if you go to creditladder.co.uk, there's some information on there about how you can join that scheme and pay your rent via that scheme, and then it actually builds your credit score muscles. So it's really great for people that are looking to get onto the property ladder, or people maybe who are paying rent and then not mortgage payments. And it's quite frustrating, isn't it? It's like, well, I've been renting for 10 years, surely paying my rent as evidence I'm a responsible borrower. So that's one way of actually demonstrating that you are a responsible borrower, is through something like Credit Ladder. So go and check them out too. Tip number 16, get your name on household bills. This is a really easy one, but a big one. So let's say, for example, you've got energy bills, council tax, phone bills. Get your names on those accounts, because then that, again, it's a credit facility. It's an easy one because it's often paid by direct debit. It also means that if it's in joint names, either of you can then negotiate your deals, and depending on whose responsibility that is in the household. But it's a really easy one. So just ring the providers and ask if you can add a secondary person to the account with household bills. So that's a really good one. Water bills, electricity bills, those sorts of things. Tip number 17 is don't withdraw cash from credit cards. It's not a great thing to do anyway, because most credit card companies will charge you a fee. But just something to think about is if you withdraw cash from a credit card, if you think about that, it kind of shows that it's almost like a last resort, because you're looking to get instant cash from somewhere and you're borrowing that instant cash against a credit card. So it's, if you're in an emergency, real emergency, and that's the last thing that you have available to you, then absolutely. But it can indicate poor money habits, particularly if it's ongoingly. So use that really as a final resort. Tip number 18 then is, if you are post bankruptcy, then one of the best things that you can do is to add a short statement to your credit file that explains the reason why you went bankrupt. That could have been a redundancy, it might have been ill health. Most people there's a big taboo around the subject of bankruptcy, because people have a huge amount of judgment and shame if they've ever been in an IVA scenario, an involuntary agreement, or a bankruptcy order. And obviously that's a whole different subject, and on videos we've done before about getting rid of that shame and that guilt and releasing any previous financial decisions that we've made. Really important part of the whole process about your money behaviours. But there could be some really justifiable reasons why somebody's gone bankrupt. I know plenty of people that have gone bankrupt in business, and it's not because they're bad people, it's not because they made bad decisions, it's just because something happened. And this is why creating strong financial foundations is so important, because you want to try and protect yourself against the possibilities that things can happen. But you can add a statement onto your credit file to show lenders the reason why, or at least explain why that happened. And you can do that just by simply writing to the credit agencies. So that's something that's worth doing. Tip number 19 then is to, and I referred to this earlier, to space out your applications, but really wait at least 90 days between applications, ideally 6 months, but a minimum of 90 days. So let me give you an example. let's say you've taken, so we've recently purchased a Peloton bike. Now we decided to use their payment plan because it's 0%, and we've just put that amount of money to one side in a bank account pot, and the direct debit just comes out of that pot because it just means we've got a bit more cash flow. That was a credit agreement. So ideally, I don't want to apply for any more credit agreements in the next at least 90 days, ideally 6 months, because again, you don't want to be applying for credit too often. So try and space out your applications. And then the final tip is to do a soft eligibility search first. So I talked earlier about looking at your credit rating and looking at your availability for credit, but do those soft checks first. So just simply Google eligibility calculators, and there's a whole load of them all over the website, all over Google, that you can utilize just to kind of help you to look at, is that something that you could actually be eligible before you actually go ahead and make the application. So that's my 20 tips. I hope you found that useful. Thank you for watching that bit. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do me a big favor and leave me a comment below this video and let me know, what was your one biggest takeaway? What are you going to do differently as a result of watching today's video? Now, you can go ahead and check out more free resources available to you at the website, which is themoneypanel.co.uk, or please feel free to tune into our weekly podcast on all of the typical podcast channels. That's In Her Financial Shoes. And remember, small steps, big wins. Let's go.